Welcome to the Social Engineer Podcast, the Security Awareness Series. I'm Chris Hednaghy, CEO and founder of Social Engineer, the Innocent Lives Foundation, and the Institute for Social Engineering. And this is episode 289. And we've been doing this podcast since way back in 2009. And as always, it is sponsored by the company Social Engineer. So we're very excited as we enter 2025. We have a whole host of new things we'll be announcing on the website. So go over to social-engineer.com and check it out. Also, if you're into social engineering as a topic and you want a family-friendly and legal chat, then we have a Slack channel. I think there's close to 2,000 people in there right now. And we invite anyone in that wants to join and just chat about anything from the psychology of it. We even have a job board in there. We've had about a dozen people find employment when they're looking. So if that sounds like you can find it in the show notes, or if you can't, just ping me on LinkedIn and I'll get you the most current Slack link. I also want to invite everyone to take a minute to go to visit innocentlivesfoundation.org. If you're not familiar with a nonprofit over there, it's about 7.5 years old. And our mission is to work with law enforcement around the globe to geolocate people who traffic children and create child abuse material. And I'm really so happy with the team over there. We're up to 540 plus cases now over the 7.5 years. And as anyone who follows us knows, we're a non-vigilante group. What that means is we don't go out and make believe we're a kid on the internet and then get these guys to come to a McDonald's. 86% of those cases get kicked out of court. We do everything legally and above board. And we assist law enforcement in getting these cases so these guys can be apprehended and not hurt any more kids. So if you're interested in supporting us, you can do that at innocentlivesfoundation.org. We are a charity, 501c3. And last but not least, if you like the music at the intro and outro, it is none other than the rock band Clutch, all the way down from the Maryland area. You know I love them since I've been 17, but now I'm going to convert everyone into loving them. So just go listen to them, clutchmerch.com. And if you like the episode, give us a thumbs up, a heart, and keep your comments coming because it really does help us. Now, let's talk about our guest. This is exciting for me here. David Holtzman has a long history in InfoSec. He was a CTO for network solutions. He was a chief scientist at IBM. Then he was a CTO and cybersecurity advisor to 2 presidential candidates and a former intelligence agent. And now he advises on Web3 and blockchain. David, it's great to have you here today.
I'm happy to be here.
So let's talk. This experience, this is like we were talking before the show. Your experience goes way back in the internet. So let's start with something really basic. What have you seen in the threat landscape over your career here in InfoSec?
The threats have gotten more sophisticated, and there's a really good reason for that. There's more things at value. If you have a crappy car and it's a junk car and you don't lock it, no one's going to steal your car. If you have a good car, even if you do lock it, they might steal your car. Yeah. So the potential value now around the internet for breaking into things is just mind numbing. I don't think anybody actually knows how much ransom is paid every year. But I think it's more than most people think.
I read one report that, and this was just the ransoms that were paid. I think the group was Black Basta. A researcher went and just counted all the payments that were publicly noted, and they made over 100 million. And that's that to me. I'm like, what?
I would have guessed $500 million or more, but yeah, okay.
I'm sure it's even more than what there was reported, right?
Well, and look at the value for 0 days now. See, if you look at the history of that stuff, 0 days were free. It was a nice thing that programmers would do. They would find a bug and then they would send it, to a place. They never got a penny for that. Yeah. And now, iOS 0 days are like, it's over $1 million now.
Yeah. I started off at exploit development, and I remember giving to Microsoft things that we would find, and they would still blast us publicly and say we were, invalid researchers. So now if I can go back to those days, you could make some serious money with that.
Well, since philosophically speaking here, I don't think there's anything that's ever been created by humans that are as complicated as a piece of software. Yeah. There's so many moving parts. I was a programmer for many years in like 20 different programming languages. And even a relatively small program has so many places where there can be a problem. It could be something as simple as like badly declared global variables. I mean, there's a million ways you can have buffer overflows. Sometimes it's a real backdoor. I mean, I have put backdoors in software I built, and I know a lot of other people do too. And those things can be turned against you at some point. So given the amazing number of vulnerability points in the way software and systems are designed, none of this is a big surprise to me.
So do you think that because I think this is a big topic, insecure software is a huge risk for companies today. Do you think it's the drive to get things out as fast as possible that keeps software being so insecure, or what do you think is behind that?
I think there's, to some extent, what you just said. I have two bigger reasons. One reason is the lack of funding for effective cybersecurity in the SaaS companies and the third parties. And the second is the fact that companies use them. So when you look at all the really big breaches and the data breaches, almost every one of them is not the principal whose name, like Equifax, gets attached to it. It's a point of sale system. Yep. It's an outsourced security system. It's always something like that. So if you're, a CIO, CTO, CEO, CISO, how do you actually effectively manage your security when you've just taken the most vulnerable parts of your system and handed them to people and you don't even know who the hell they are? And so that's a far bigger problem than most people talk about. And then, I was talking about the budgeting and all that. I'm thinking more about the Internet of Things here, because when you look at, IoT devices, and I've talked to a lot of companies that build these things, they use outsourced labor to build the device, whether it's like a Wi-Fi toaster or whatever it is. And they'll hire a couple of guys from India typically, and they'll build it, but they don't maintain it. And like none of these things are maintained. Cars. I mean, General Motors OnStar has been, as far as I know, has been hackable for 15 years. Yeah. And it hasn't been fixed because they don't have a lot of people that are being devoted to that, because you don't sell more cars by doing maintenance. So you got the collision of both of those things. And I guess the third thing is the one I mentioned earlier. There's more at stake. There's more to steal, and you're not going to get caught. Nobody gets caught. The only people that get caught for hacking, I mean, I'm sure you think the same thing I do when you hear about it. It's like, how stupid were they to get caught? Yeah. Like, how did they get caught?
Right. Yeah. Their OPSEC was just, and they had usually if it's greed, or they brag too much of the wrong people, it's usually ego or greed that gets them. But if they don't get that, these guys they disappear on the internet.
Well, in the early days, the very early days, the first malware that I think existed was something called the Pakistani brain virus. And it was two brothers in Lahore, Pakistan. And they thought it would be fun to do. And they just wrote something. I mean, it wasn't like that really clever. So they got arrested immediately. And the reason was because they put a copyright notice in the header of every file that you could just read in the binary. So, I mean, things have gotten a little better than that now.
Yeah, I'd say. It makes me think your second reason, one of your things you were saying, like we saw MGM get hacked because of Okta. Now, you would think that every CISO on the planet that is using Okta would be like, okay, let's make sure we're not on that version. But then we saw months and months and months following companies just dropping because they didn't update their Okta. So how do you think we change that mentality? Because I know you and I were talking about budgets being small and things like that, but even if you have a small budget, if you saw company X get hacked because of a piece of software I'm using, I'm going to find the money to fix that because I don't want to be the next one on the docket.
So I don't want to say anything offensive to your audience. There are good CISOs and bad CISOs.
Yeah.
And there are people who are trained. And when I say trained, I do not mean Microsoft certifications, which are completely worthless in my opinion, unless you're an all Microsoft shop and it's really standard. But people who actually can think on their feet and they understand the principles of cybersecurity are probably not going to work for your uncle's insurance company.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to work their way pretty quickly up to a, $180,000 a year job somewhere.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be in these places. So that's a big problem. And a secondary problem is that the people who are involved in security and even technology decisions in most companies, unless you're Google, they do not have a lot of clout. So the CFO, the CIO has way more clout than CTOs, and the CISO has no clout at all. And in most organizations, the CISO reports to the CIO, not the CTO, and that's often problematic too. Sometimes the CFO or the COO. So,
that would be even worse, right? Because then if it's a CFO, every decision is now about money, not about what's the best secure.
But the whole outsourcing thing that I was talking about, I mean, that's about money too, right? I mean, So back in the 80s, I did a bunch of startup companies, and then I ended up at Network Solutions for a while. And whenever I did a startup company, the first thing I would have to do would be to build a data center. So I would have to raise enough venture capital to build a data center, which thankfully wasn't all that much back. It's still a couple $1 million, but I'd have to rent a facility. I'd have to buy servers. I'd have to hire a couple of good guys. I'd have to look at the UPS system, the generator, the security, the coolant. And that was just part of the job.
Yeah.
Not anymore. I mean, look at the cloud. I mean, people don't even maintain their own data. Everybody uses, AWS or Azure or something, and they're going to get burned on that. I mean, AWS is going to get hacked in a big way sometime. I mean, there's been little pieces of it, but I don't know.
So you mentioned good and bad CISOs, right? I don't think that's offensive to anyone, because anyone listening to this wants to be a good CISO. So in your experience throughout your career being a CTO and working at all these different organizations and government, what aspects make up a good CISO?
This is going to be a little counter establishment. I don't think it's formal training. I think almost all the certifications are actually worthless. Like I said, and I don't think a computer science degree is all that helpful either. I think what's helpful is somebody who buys a computer when they're 15 and teaches themselves how to hack and sneaks into, black hat conferences and, that kind of thing. I mean, it's the sense of curiosity and the ability to think like an evildoer that helps, because you can't be a CISO that's good unless you can have an evil hat you can put on, because you have to conjecture things that everybody around you is going to think is stupid and alarmist. So I think it's personality traits.
Okay, that's an interesting take. We had a CISO on here for a large bank, and he was talking very similar. Like he said, there's not really a training program that gets you ready to be a CISO. He also felt that life experience makes a great CISO, kind of like what you were saying.
So I'll give you another example. I have degrees in computer science and math and stuff. My original degree was in philosophy, and I was invited to be a keynote speaker like a long time ago at the first Chief Technology Officers Conference, and it was sponsored by a computer magazine that went out of business like 30 years ago. So it was supposed to be the top 100 CTOs, and I was a speaker, and the guy from Sun Microsystems was a speaker, and somebody else. And we started off the show, and we asked everybody in the room, they're all CTOs of major companies. We said, what was your undergraduate degree in? 50% of them had humanities degrees, not technical degrees. And out of the 100, only 3 of them had been to either Stanford, MIT, or Carnegie Mellon.
Yeah. We're a small company, but my previous CISO and COO, his degree was in art.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was amazing. Yeah,
but see, this supports my point. And HR people would just balk if they ever heard, that they're not going to listen to your podcast anyway. Yeah. But if they did, they would disagree with that. they would say, oh, you have to have this certification and this many years experience. I want someone who knows how to think.
Yeah.
I mean, critical thinking, a good sense of curiosity, and kind of a cybersecurity empathy. I mean, the ability to kind of, like I said, think like the enemy, because the difference between a white hat and a black hat sometimes is just the day of the week.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, my team, my ops team, I have a guy who was a collections agent. I have a woman who was a sign language interpreter, another woman who was a hotel accountant. Nobody from InfoSec, a couple from InfoSec, but most of the ops team come from other areas where I was like, oh, when you could do that for a living, you could probably get on the phone and vish people,
Yeah, well, absolutely. And when you look at the big security threats, very, very few of them are highly sophisticated computer science hacks. And when they are, the average CISO wouldn't be able, if it's a 0 day, they're not going to catch it anyway. Mm-hmm. So what they are they're, vishing or phishing, or some going to your thing. They're usually social engineering, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we see in the reports, right? It's still like something like 90 or 90% of all the breaches involve some aspect of social engineering. I mean, it's just crazy, isn't it?
But you hear technical people like you and I say that, but when you go up a level to mass media, they never say that. Yeah. And the companies, and this actually makes my blood boil, but the companies blame consumers when there's a data breach. So, Equifax tried that when they got burned, and, they had like 150 million, 200 million, something like that. And they said, well, they must have all picked bad passwords or something. And it's just, it's idiotic. Yeah. Nobody's getting hit on bad passwords, or not very often. Yeah. They're because it's not worth your while. If you're 100 guys in a room in Moscow or wherever you are, and you're doing this for a living, you're not going to crack, some guy's password unless it's just for fun. You're going to crack everybody's stuff. Right. So you have to do things in bulk. And if you're doing things in bulk, you don't care about the individual consumer. You care about the companies.
Yeah. And I was just reading this report about NPD, that 3 billion character breach, and it was like they ended up going bankrupt because of all the class action lawsuits. And, I don't really feel terrible, because I look at those companies, and a lot of times, like these companies you mentioned, there's no repercussions for them. They continue doing business. It's you and I, if we were ever doing business with them, that suffers. Right? I still got to pay AT&T my cell phone bill every month, and yet my data's all over the black web because of them, right?
I live in the middle of Washington, D.C., and I have most of my adult life. So I often, get to interact with congressmen or senators or things like that. And sometimes I get asked to come in and talk to them officially. And whenever I get that opportunity, I have this kind of discussion with them. And it really doesn't go very far. Mm-hmm. And what I suggest, and I've been very consistent about this, and I wrote a book called, I didn't even mention, I wrote a couple of books. I wrote a book called Privacy Lost. Still taught in all the law schools. And it went into this. And what I suggested is that there is a penalty for data breaches where you take a fixed dollar amount and multiply it times the number of consumers who were breached. So that's how the EPA got cleaned up rivers. They did that. They said, like, every Aaron Brockovich incident was going to be so many dollars. And then they stopped. Or a lot of them did, because it's easy to quantify the downside. Yeah. But what's the downside if you're a big company and you get hacked and all your so you just buy them that idiotic TransUnion credit monitoring thing, which if you take that, you're going to get into more trouble in the long run anyway. Yeah. So and I just got a check today. I mentioned Equifax, I guess, because I just got a check from the Equifax settlement, class action settlement. It was $7.11. I don't think it's even worth the gas to go to the bank and cash it.
No.
But the law firms, I don't know, tens, hundreds of millions. I have no idea.
Yeah. I mean, what AT&T did for its customers is that you get a $10 credit on your bill now.
I saw
$10 credit. You know, and so in essence, what these companies say, like what Equifax is saying to you, is that to them, your data was worth $7. That's it. That's all your data was worth to them, is $7, because that's what you get for your data being breached.
But what it's worth to you,
yeah,
is a lot more.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that really angers me, actually, is there's no actual marketplace anymore. It used to be that when you were interacting with a business, there was an implicit agreement, and that you would do something, then they would do something. And if you didn't like it, you'd go to court and sue them, or you'd go to a competitor. Well, there are no competitors because there's virtual monopolies in almost every imaginable thing that we buy or rent or use. And you can't sue anybody anymore because of these idiotic arbitration clauses that go into all the shrink wrapped agreements. And I don't think people understand that one either, but almost any software product or hardware product you buy, and really almost everything else now, has an arbitration agreement that you're signing up to by using the software. And instead of suing, you have to go to Biloxi or something and go to an arbitrator who's probably the cousin of the guy that owns the law firm.
Right.
Nobody wins that.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's get some advice for the CISOs, right? Because you said a bunch of really great things about education and stuff. What would you tell, let's say, a new CISO listening to this podcast, some things that he or she should do to become that great CISO?
Well, I want to bifurcate this advice. So the first part of the advice is what they should do with the company they're working for right now.
Okay.
And then the second part of the advice is maybe thinking about the company that they want to work for in a couple of years, because I think those are probably two different things. So the first part of that is what I was saying. Hire people that have a brain, and you're going to have to fight with HR and your boss, but find people that can think. Find somebody who does the New York Times crossword puzzle every morning, or something. They've demonstrated some ability to think analytically and think outside the box, and maybe they're a little bit dark, and that's the kind of person you want. And then you want to pay them well and motivate them and let them go at it. Make them do the stuff they have to do, but give them a couple hours every day to do what they want on their own, and they'll find something. So I think surrounding yourself with good people. And by the way, when you do that, these people will be very loyal to you, and you're not going to get backstabbed. They're going to tell you things that you need to hear. They'll take your side. And CISOs get into political arguments in every company I have ever seen. They get, because of budgeting issues usually.
Yeah.
So these people, if you take care of them, they'll take care of you. And then
I love that.
Yeah. So the second part of my advice is what's the average age of a CISO? It's got to be under 30, right?
Yeah, it's got to be, right?
I don't know what
I would imagine.
The CTOs are like 28 or something like that. I would assume CISOs are, give or take a year or two on either side of 30. They're not 60. Let's put it that way.
No, definitely not.
I'm probably the oldest cybersecurity person I know. But there, it's people who go way back in the internet. So I would look ahead. If you're 25, 27, 30, you got a lot of career left, and you have to understand that whatever you're doing 5 or 10 years from now in the world of cybersecurity is going to look absolutely nothing like what you're dealing with today. And every hour you spend in college getting educated for something stupid, you might as well just learn Latin, because it'll be more use to you on a daily basis. The stuff changes. So, and here's the stuff that I would be thinking about. I believe the future of cybersecurity is going to be AI driven. And we're not talking 100 years from now. We're talking like a couple of years from now.
Yeah.
I mean, passwords are already getting cracked by AIs, not by human beings. So I have not heard of this happening yet, but I think we're going to get to the point where you're going to have an AI that's just unleashed against a target network, and having it try every known exploit, and it will know what all the exploits are. And then it'll start trying to find a new one, and it'll find some weird buffer overflow that you never imagined would happen. And then the only way to stop that is to have another AI on the defensive side, and then it becomes AI versus AI.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's certainly true in the military and intelligence world. It's already happening today. So
have you heard of fraud GPT?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. So 1,800 euros a year. Anyone can buy this thing, and it does very close to what you said. I mean, it will, you say, hey, go to Microsoft.com and scan the whole site and find me a vulnerability, then exploit it, then give me the data. And I'm like, you don't even need to be a coder anymore or an exploit developer.
Well, you haven't had to been a coder to be a hacker for quite a while now.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe a little bit of, BS JavaScript or Python or something.
Yeah.
But most people that are involved in this stuff could not generate a 5,000 word C++ program, I would bet.
No, I could not. No.
Yeah. Well, I
was writing in Python, basically. My exploits were in Python. That was it,
Okay. Well, we used to call people who did that script kiddies.
Yeah.
More, I don't know if that term's even used anymore.
It is. It's used for a different purpose now, but it is used.
So the AI versus AI, I mean, that's clearly within 5 years.
Yeah, I think so.
And then the other thing goes back to everything I talked about at the beginning of this podcast. Web 2 is dead and dying. Mm-hmm. Web 3 is not really here, but I can hear it on the approach. Those are the companies I'm working with, because Web 3 companies basically disintermediate these third-party software or service providers that are causing all the trouble to begin with.
So let's define that for those who are listening who might not know. Can you define what is the Web 3 versus Web 2?
I mean, very simple. I'll give you, this isn't correct, but it's a simplistic answer. When I think of Web 3 in this context, I mean decentralized systems, decentralized financial systems, decentralized authentication systems. So one of the big advantages of blockchain is you don't need a third party. So, Microsoft, who I think, is one of the sources of most evil on the internet. And if you look at the stuff they do, almost everything requires some kind of centralized authentication. I was just in a trip overseas a couple of weeks ago, and my copy of, Office 365 for the Mac stopped working because it did a license check when I was over the Pacific Ocean. And I was pretty upset about that.
Yeah.
And that stuff happens all the time, and we just put up with it. So when that stuff goes away and all the authentication is blockchain based or something, it's going to be much faster, and the vulnerabilities will be greatly diminished, and you'll control most of them. So I don't know how familiar everybody is with blockchain, but the idea of a blockchain like Bitcoin, for instance, is you commit a block of data to the blockchain, and the authentication token to get that block back is some encrypted password or string of letters and numbers and symbols that you picked. And it's up to you whether you're dumb enough to give somebody that string. If you don't give them the string, then nobody can take it from you. And by the way, nobody actually knows who you really are, which is why Satoshi Nakamoto, the guy who created Bitcoin, walked away with, I don't know, like $15 billion or $20 billion. And nobody still knows who this guy is.
Yeah. So for those that might be hearing this and like, okay, I hear what you just said. It makes sense. But now let me ask this question. It's probably a dumb question. If you put your encryption or your data out onto the blockchain, and the blockchain is open source, basically, can't other people now find it and try to crack it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the only thing on that block is your public key. You still have your private key. Now, the keys can be very long. And as a rule of thumb, every time you add a character onto a key for encryption, it increases somewhat geometric. It's not linear, it's geometric. So if you get like a 10 or say a 20-bit encryption, I don't think there's enough computers in the world to break one of those. Now, having said that, and I'm not even sure I should even bring this up, but the thing that negates everything I just said would be working quantum computers. And the company I'm working with, Neoris, actually, it is Web3 based. It is blockchain based. I'm the chief strategy officer for them, and they have post-quantum encryption. And so when quantum computers become, feasible and workable and usable, then everything I just said about blockchains goes out the window.
But until that happens, so to get the concept correct, you're saying all my data is stored decentralized in my location, not on the cloud, but it's encrypted. And to decrypt it and to get to use it, I have to hit the blockchain with my private key, because the public key will now match my private key and unlock my data locally.
That's right. And the other cool thing is, let's say that block is something valuable, like one of those incredibly idiotic NFTs that everybody was spending millions of dollars. The lounge lizards, whatever those things were.
It was so ridiculous.
They were really,
they really were.
They were really ridiculous.
They really were.
But those things, those are digital artifacts that have value to somebody, and they're contained. You can pack them into a block and stick it on the blockchain, and then if you sell that thing, you just need to give the buyer your public key or your private key for that block, and then they own that, and they can transfer it and put a new key on it or whatever. But you can transfer a digital good. And now, having said that, when you take this is one of the most subversive technologies that have ever been created, if you think about it from that end, because that transaction I just talked about, one guy could be in Moscow and the other guy could be in New York, and the intelligence agencies won't know, the tax authorities won't know, and if you're going through a divorce, your ex-spouse won't know. So you can duck an enormous amount of accountability to the public. And I think that's actually one of the hidden tenets of Web3.
It's an interesting concept, because, I'm like you. We use the cloud, we use it, but it makes me scared. It scares me. It's kind of hard we had software that we always had it on-prem. And then that company went, guess what? We're getting rid of our on-prem. Or if you want it, you can pay this exorbitant amount of money and monthly fees, or you could just go to the cloud for really cheap. So they made it so like you can't have on-prem solutions anymore. And, I am looking forward to a time when we can do what you just said, because that is, it is scary to think about how much lives I don't even know where. I can't tell you where it is.
Well, also consider that bandwidth has gotten cheaper and storage devices are still kind of tracking Moore's law, sort of. Moore's law said that the price of storage will go down by 50% every year or so. It said other things, but it was Gordon Moore, that CEO of Intel, said this, and he's been pretty much tracking that for 30 years. Yeah. So you can buy. Just think about hard drives, or these days think about SD cards for a camera or something.
1 terabyte SD card, like what the heck?
That's crazy.
That's crazy.
I just stare at that thing. The first computer I had was an Epson PX8 Geneva, and it used an operating system called CPM, and it had, I think, 2K of memory, and it had no disk drive, and I had to buy a cassette tape thing to hook up to it, and that stupid tape drive cost me $600. Yeah, and you could only store a 2K program, which is like 1 page of code, and 90% of the time it wouldn't even load, and you'd have to do it again.
My first computer was a Commodore 64, so I get it.
Same thing.
It was I love that thing too.
Well, I had an Atari 800. It was the best you could get.
Yeah.
So, but it's so cheap now.
Yeah.
You can, any normal person with normal financial assets can afford to buy 8 or 10 terabytes of storage. Yeah. And if you have that, unless you're really some kind of music freak or video freak, you can put every digital thing that you have and ever will have onto that storage device.
We're still stuck though right now because, like you said, you flew overseas and your Microsoft Office stopped working. And why? Because, well, you don't have a choice. It's connected to their cloud. So until those things become decentralized, we're kind of forced into using things that keep us right where we are.
Well, and I think this is going to be a much bigger issue in a couple of years. It's this whole Web 2, Web 3 thing. It's not very well understood, and people think it's some blockchain thing. But it's rising to the level of public awareness, and when you're going to see it, it's going to be big, hairy attacks by companies that have vested interests, like Microsoft and Google, and anybody else. Amazon for sure. And these guys are going to want to maintain the status quo because they benefit from the status quo. Yeah. And then it doesn't cost a lot of money to build a subversive Web3 program that kind of offers some real value to somebody anywhere in the world without being spotted or tracked or picked up by the thought police or whatever you're worried about. If I lived in Hong Kong, I would be using stuff like this.
Yeah, I agree. David, I always ask these questions as we close up. If people want to know more about you or follow you, what's the best route for them to go?
DavidHoltzman.com is my website, and they can. I have a book on Amazon, Privacy Lost, and I think there's a Wikipedia page on that and some other stuff.
Okay, so besides your book, which I will put, we'll put a link to that in the show notes. Let me just put a note for that. Are there any books that we've since 2009, we've been asking our guests this question, and then we have a book list. It doesn't have to be about anything we talked about, but do you have a book that you read or you are reading that you're like, I love this book. I want everyone to read it.
Well, it's funny because before I dialed into this thing or linked into this thing, I was reading your book list. And there's a couple of really good, like the Bruce Schneier books and stuff. I mean, I would really recommend those, but I would suggest to people that they go back like a ways into the hoary areas of computer science. So there was a book by a friend of mine called Crossing the Chasm, and it's a guy, Geoffrey Moore, who ended up being a venture capitalist, and Jeff came up with this idea. It's about adoption of products, but it applies to security products. And he has this idea that there's sort of 5 groups of people, and you have mainstream, and they're the people who buy things 5 years after it comes out, and then you have early adopters, and the gap between those two he calls the chasm, and he says most products never cross it. So they build a product that is, and I would argue Meta's virtual reality goggles are clearly falling in that category, because I had Google Glass and I wish I could get my $1,000 back. But so a lot of things get on that one side and they never cross to the other side. So I like that book a lot. I still look at it a lot.
I like that suggestion. Thank you. And then I don't know about you, but I wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for some very good mentors in my life, people that have really helped me shape my career, kind of change who I am. Do you have any mentors that you can name that helped you get to where you are today?
Is it okay if they're all dead?
Yeah, sure. I can't interview them, but that's okay.
I worked with Steve Jobs a bunch.
Oh, did you?
I was a Next programmer. I ran research at Booz Allen and Hamilton. So for 4 years, I was probably the biggest. I probably ran the biggest Next programming shop because our customer was the CIA, who was really into Next computers. So I got to spend a lot of time with Steve. He wasn't a mentor, but I learned a lot from him. And another guy, this is a philosophical thing, is a guy named, do you know who John Perry Barlow was?
I do not.
You should look him up.
Okay.
John Perry Barlow was one of the first editor contributing writers to Wired magazine when it started. Oh. But he was also a lyricist for the Grateful Dead.
Really?
Yeah, very unusual man. And he came up with something he called the manifesto of the internet. And a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, he actually saw. John was a real visionary.
With just a side question, I'm always curious about this. Was Steve Jobs as insanely intelligent as as the internet says he was?
I didn't know him that well, but the thing he was really good at was he knew what people would want. He was not a programmer, and he wasn't even a tech guy. So he would he would go and visit other companies. This is how the windowing system got moved into the Mac. He went to a company called SRI, and there was a guy there named Doug Engelbart who had invented mice and windowing systems for a computer. And Jobs got a demo, and he basically stole the concept and came back to Apple. He used to listen to music on it was called a creative music player. It was about that big, and it stored like 5 songs in MP3 format, and the battery lasted for 4 songs, so it wasn't really all that useful. And Jobs hated it, and he went to his engineers and said, "This is what I want," and that's where the first iPod came from. So, I mean, he was really good at that. I think a better comparison to him right now would be Elon Musk, because I think I have enormous problems with Elon Musk up and down the line on a whole bunch of stuff, but I drive a Tesla and I use Starlink. And he's putting rockets in space, and
yeah, I know.
I mean, he's a visionary. There's no way around. He may be a flaming jerk, but he's also a visionary.
Yeah. The two don't cancel each other out, right? Just because someone's a jerk doesn't mean they can't be intelligent and a visionary.
Well, if you read about the life of Henry Ford or Thomas Edison or even Da Vinci, they were kind of jerks too.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. David, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed getting to know you and getting your insights on a lot of these things, and for all these recommendations too. I really appreciate you being on the show today.
Thank you, Chris. It was a pleasure being here.
I want to thank you all for joining us on the episode today. Hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed recording it. And now that we're in 2025, it's time to look forward to the next series of podcasts that we're going to have more security professionals on, teaching us wonderful ways to stay secure and challenging our thinking. So until then, stay safe, and I'll see you next month. See you.